Aloha, everybody. Welcome in to April 3rd, Thursday. We still have some people connecting, so I'm just going to give it just a few more seconds. Okay, welcome everybody to what month are we? April 3rd, Thursday. We have a very, very special presentation today on risk communication, meaningful engagement for more effective hazards planning. Before I get to our esteemed speaker, I just would like to remind you of the chat function. I have a sneaky feeling we're going to be using it a lot today. So please locate where your chat is and feel free to list any questions you have. We would prefer if you save it till the end, but not to worry. If you have a burning question, put it in the chat and I'll log it, even if we do have a lot of entries coming in. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Stephanie Farver, who is a meteorologist and risk communication specialist at the National Oceanic and Atmosphere Administration, or otherwise known as NOAA, for the Office of Coastal Management. Stephanie, thank you so much for presenting today.
Thank you, Amy, and hi, everyone. I appreciate the invitation to be a part of your Third Thursday series. At the Office for Coastal Management, we help local communities and their partners work towards building healthy and resilient communities, ecosystems, and economies. And I lead our risk communication training and technical assistance portfolio. So we help folks build their risk communication skills so that they're better able to engage a variety of audiences in planning for hazards. And we usually do, I've pulled from our 7 best practices for risk communication, which is usually a 90-minute interactive session. So I'm going to be going pretty quick here, but I also want to hear from you. So Amy was not exaggerating when she said we do want to have some audience participation, because things like this are much, much richer when we can learn from each other and build our collective knowledge. So hopefully you'll be sharing, and you'll see when I've asked you to share and respond to some questions in the chat box. But so what have you gotten yourself into? Like, when I think some folks are kind of surprised the way we define risk communication. We are talking about, well, it's exchanging thoughts, perceptions, and concerns about hazards to identify and motivate appropriate actions. That's our kind of not super eloquent sounding definition, but what we really mean is we want that back and forth interaction and engagement. We want to spend more time listening to our audience than we do talking at them. We want to better understand what they care about, what their concerns are, and we want to provide a space for them to think about and identify actions that make sense for their situation, whether they're thinking about their community at large or their individual situation. We don't focus on crisis communication as the disaster is unfolding. So we'll say, like, put your longer term planning hat on for the purposes of today. Is some overlap, but I don't want to leave you hanging, since that's typically not the crisis communication is not typically the area where we focus. When we do talk about risk communication, it does sound a lot like community engagement, kind of building those partnerships and building those relationships. And so kind of keep that in the back of your mind as we go forward. But I am curious to know what your level of risk communication experience is. So if you could type in the chat and share just the number, and you don't have to do the whole response, but are you sort of just getting started, just dipping your toe in at like level 1? We have a swimming reference in case you hadn't noticed. Or are you all the way up to like diving for coins in the deep end? You're doing the risk communication and you're out there engaging communities and you're just kind of here for a refresher. So I'm curious where you all are on this spectrum here of experience. Oh, I see a good mix. I see a 5 in there. All right, Monica, we're going to expect to hear a lot from you and lots of good examples. So a bunch of 3s, a couple of 1s, some 2s. Awesome. Great. I like when we have a good mix. We have some folks that are just starting and have new perspectives, and then we have folks that have kind of been doing this for a while and kind of share those examples of what they've tried and what has worked. All right. Well, thank you for sharing. So why is risk communication so challenging? I mean, we all kind of struggle with this. We talk to communities and people all the time. So why is it challenging? We like to say it's because we try the kitchen sink approach. We try and we assume that if everyone knew all of the hazards and risk information that we did, they would take the actions we want them to take. But we know that's not the case. right? More information is not the answer. So there are lots of things that we can do instead, and that's where the best practices come in. So these are the best practices that I'm going to go through. I'll talk about each one and give you all an opportunity to share as well for most of these. But the first one is really to have an informed plan. And this is, even if you've been doing this work for a while, it is good to sort of pause and think about and reorient yourself. Get your team together and kind of focus a little bit. So developing that plan, making sure you're on track, and then kind of implementing that plan. But we have a resource that we have developed that we've worked with people to do to kind of work them through the steps of this risk communication strategy template. And this is where, and I'll go through the steps pretty quickly, but mostly talking about the first one because that's the most challenging one. Um, step, and I can share a link to this resource if you're interested in using this. But step one is to define your audience and your outcome. And this is the most challenging because quite often we want to go really broad. We need so many people will be impacted by hazards, entire communities, entire areas. So we need to reach everyone. But when it comes to doing a strategy, it can help to really narrow that audience. But before I talk a little bit more about that, I want to know which audiences you are trying to connect with, or who do you want to communicate with? So go back to the chat box and share again some audiences that you are trying to connect with. Oh, Monica, I'm just seeing your your response here. I'm sorry. I hope you're feeling better. Done research and risk perceptions. Oh, awesome. Nice. Yes, you're definitely in the level 5. I accept that. All right. So go ahead and share in the chat. So who you're trying to connect with: policymakers, elected officials, Native Hawaiians, living on the homelands. Great. Let's see, students, the public, academics. Right. Any additional audiences you all are connecting with? Community members, coastal communities. Yeah, that's starting to get a little bit more narrow for sure. Emergency managers, public officials, Hawaiian Island residents, policymakers, appointed officials, emergency managers. Yep. Right. All right. Keep sharing your audiences there. I'm seeing some trends here for sure. And I think one of the things we see a lot is the public or residents or community members. And it's kind of a misnomer to think of the general public, because the general public is made up of many different individuals who all have sort of individual experiences, individual values, and different demographics, and you know live in different geographies, different experience with hazards. So thinking about how you can segment your audience and then design an interaction to connect with each of those different sub audiences can really help improve your risk communication efforts. And some ways to think about segmenting your audience: you might look at a specific neighborhood or a specific village. You might look at folks living in high risk areas. You might look at certain demographics, maybe folks over a certain age that might have some additional mobility challenges. You could look at repeat loss properties, repeat flooding properties, maybe tourists. I'm sure many of you in Hawaii have lots of tourists that you have to try and manage and deal with. You might think of folks that are new to an area, have just moved in, maybe the person who put coastal communities, Jonathan, someone new to a coastal area has different hazards they need to deal with. Experience, and even communities maybe that have, or folks that have experienced challenges already, or are experiencing additional challenges. Maybe they're dealing with affordable housing, and then this idea of hazards can exacerbate that. So if the more kind of you can segment your audience and focus and develop a strategy for each of those audiences, can be super helpful, because then you can really focus and narrow in and better meet their needs for information and for this type of information. The second piece of that first step of the strategy of defining your audience and the outcome is to think about a specific and actionable outcome. So what do you want your audiences to do? Each of those audience segments, what do you want them to do as a result of your efforts? Risk communication is challenging and it takes a while, so you want to make sure you're getting to that and building towards that outcome. So what do you want them to do? I've got a couple of examples here. The first one is for those folks wanting to connect with residents. It's still kind of broad, but maybe you want to connect with residents outside of a FEMA flood zone or a FEMA special flood hazard area that will still face flooding. We know that many folks outside of those areas still do flood and are ones who put in claims. So what would your outcome be for that? You want them to prepare for flooding for extreme major event. Okay, that's still kind of broad, right? What does that mean? And so let's think about that a little bit more specifically. What could that look like? And, quite often we want people to understand their risk or know they're at risk and understand this information, and that's helpful, but we want to get to that action. So maybe getting them to, have this stepwise approach of understanding the impacts or understanding the risk, but then maybe you want them to purchase flood insurance or have sandbags on hand to use in these situations. So thinking about the actionable piece of this, an actionable outcome, can help you also narrow the types of information and the approach that you use. A second example for those of you that want to connect with local government, um, that's still kind of broad. So think about which department, which part of local government. Is it a certain small geography, certain town? Maybe it's the public works department staff, and you want them to consider long-term change in their planning. So what could that look like? Again, you want them to understand the impacts and this information so that they can apply it. Maybe you also want them to integrate the information into all of their drainage and transportation projects. So thinking about how that action piece is a part of this, and then you can design the rest of your strategy to connect and move you forward with that audience. The second step of the strategy is to understand your audience. And I'll talk more about this in step 2 or in the best practice number 2. But think about some things that you'd want to know. What is their experience? Where do they get their information? More about what they care about. And think about the assumptions you're making about your audience and how can you test those assumptions as you start to engage with them more and more. Step 3 of the strategy template is to connect with your audience. Where will you find them? How will you engage them? What will that look like? What will it be an event? Will it be a conversation? Who will be doing the communicating? Are you the best person? Are you a trusted messenger for them? So that's the step 3 of the strategy. And I'll talk about some things that will help you fill out step 3 of the strategy as well. So I just want to kind of close out this first best practice of having an informed plan by sharing a story about Fabiola Lopez. And Fabiola she shares her story on this Every Story Counts website in her own words. And she was invited to public meetings by the city of Baltimore, where she lives. But she didn't dare attend. She knew that they would have a translator there. She speaks Spanish. She knew they would have a translator, but she felt like she would be the only person there and she wouldn't feel comfortable. And she thought, well, maybe it could even turn out worse for her if she did participate, even though the city of Baltimore was trying to connect with as many people as they could, as many residents in the community, so they can help inform their sustainability plan. So the city right idea and wanted to connect with these folks with voices who are not often incorporated into local government and decision making, but they didn't necessarily go about it the right way. They had the police department as the host of the session, and they did have translators, but that wasn't enough to really make Fabiola feel comfortable participating. So she ended up working with the city and with some of her other fellow residents in her community, to develop the Comité Latino de Baltimore. And this was their opportunity to be a conduit for people in their community to connect with and have a voice with the government, with the city of Baltimore. So keep that story in mind as you're designing your engagement, because you want to really make sure that your engagement is going to meet the needs of your audience. So that's kind of the first best practice, to have an informed plan and design it to meet the needs of your audience. The second best practice, I'm going to keep us moving a little bit here, is to get to know your audience. So some things you might want to know about them include their past experience with the hazard, even though, like, for all of us, we have been through COVID together. each person's experience is very individual. So getting folks to share their story and talk about their experience can be really helpful and help you understand what they are going through, and also help you understand what is most important to them. Are they worried about the safety of their community? Are they worried about the character of their community, maybe their investment in their home when it comes to hazards? They're, figuring out what they care about most can help us connect that hazard to what they care about so that they have a personal reason to pay attention. If they don't think that what they care about is going to be impacted by a hazard, they have no reason to even engage with you in your efforts. So find out what's important to them, what they care about most, who they are influenced by, because we're very much influenced by the people around us, whether it's our family, whether that's our friends, or maybe it's community groups. So recognizing what groups they're a part of can really help us understand and better connect with them. It also helps to know what actions a person has taken, maybe what actions they took for the last hurricane or the last flood, so that you know what they might be able to do, or what actions they wish they had taken, or maybe what actions they wish the community had done as a whole. So it also helps to know what their barriers are to action. So hopefully we can lessen those barriers and we can highlight the individual benefits to folks, because that's what's going to motivate them to take some sort of action to change their behavior. And we also want to think about efficacy. We need to know that we have the ability to take the action that someone wants, thinks we should take, right? We need to have, whether it's the skills, whether it's the finances, whether it's a contractor, if we want them to make some modification to their home, making sure that we have the ability to do that. You can't ask someone to elevate their home out of if they're in a flood zone if they don't have the resources to do that. So we want to make sure that the actions we're asking them to take are reasonable. So that's kind of the sort of getting to know your audience and some things that would be helpful to know about them. I'm curious what methods you have used to learn about your audiences. So go back to the chat again for me and share with your colleagues and with us, like what you have done to learn about your audience or what you have seen others do. Oh, thank you, Liz, for putting the Baltimore story in there. And I can share some resources afterwards as well, or I'll give them to Amy to share. Right, surveys, yes, definitely. You can get a lot of information. And don't make the mistake I did. I did a survey years and years ago before I knew that there were experts in that area, and I did not do a good job. My questions were not good. I got a lot of people to respond, but I didn't know how to incorporate their suggestions because my questions weren't worded properly. But ask questions about what is most meaningful. Monica, yep. Thank you. Yeah. So having those conversations and being good listeners, right? Open house, definitely. Speaking with them face to face, yes. Talk story, yes. I love that phrase, talk story. Great. Open houses, putting up maps where they can mark them up. Yes, definitely. Good point, Jonathan. Yep. So some great ideas. Of course, the best way for sure, talk story face to face, right? I think you all are right on there. I feel like we want to go to our audience. We can't expect them to come to us. If you're trying to maybe even connect with local business leaders, for example, business owners, right? You need to go to their business to talk to them, right? They're not going to be able to close their business to engage with you. So thinking about where you'll find your audience and go to them. And this is a great way to foster trust and build those relationships, um, so that we can kind of continue to have this dialogue, right? So take the time to do that. We often want to connect also on a human level and make sure we're really listening to folks, not listening so we can respond, but listening so we really understand their perspective and where they're coming from. You all, I did see surveys mentioned for sure, and interviews, focus groups, and these are things that we have some folks in our office who can help with this if you don't have that expertise. So reach out to me and I can put you in touch with folks to get some help, and they can kind of review your questions and your process and give some tips and ideas. So now we're moving on. We've gotten to know our audience. We've checked our assumptions, and now we are going to. I'm sorry, I'm just checking my time here. Um, we want to establish partnerships. We can't connect with all of our audience members and get to know everyone, so we need partners to help us do this. And quite often, you want to find out who they trust for sure. Otherwise, it's not going to matter. Um, so connecting with trusted community leaders is a great way to do that for sure. And they could be spiritual leaders, they could be civic organizations, they could be neighborhood associations or other sort of community-based organizations. But find out who your audience trusts and connect and work with and partner with those groups. Um, we want to also identify groups that are already working with our audience. This is particularly true with communities that have been historically disinvested in. There's now seeing a lot of folks coming and saying they're here to help. It's like, okay, well, that's great, but they're almost overwhelmed with the response. So first doing your homework and finding out who is already working with your audience, and then reach out with them or have them reach out and think about how you may have different priorities and different motivations, but think about how you can work together to move that community forward and help that community reach their community goals and their vision for their community when it comes to disasters, preparing for disasters. Um, and working together is super important to work together and create and share consistent information, because when we hear inconsistent information, we're going to ignore it. It will lead to confusion. So we need to hear the same thing multiple times from multiple trusted sources before it really sinks in and connects. So making sure we have that consistent voice across those partnerships is super important. So I want to ask you all who you think you could partner with that your audience trusts. I gave a couple of examples, but I'm curious who you maybe are partnering with or who you'd like to partner with, who your trusts. Oh, I'm going back to the chat. Participatory mapping. Yep, I'm looking at how you were connecting some of the previous responses. Yes, running factual information. Yep. Yes. Neighborhood groups, definitely. Definitely. Religious leaders, cultural practitioners, community leaders. Oh, from the Maui fires, local religious leaders. Oh, yeah. Fire districts. Yes, definitely. Great. Thank you for sharing. Go ahead and continue to think about and share some partners that you think would be trusted. Subject matter experts, homestead association leadership. Yep. Yeah. So it all depends, right, on who your audience trusts for this type of information. Yep. So I want to, and so sometimes it's also important to think about. We may have all sorts of degrees and expertise in an area, but if you're not going to be the trusted source of information in that community, then it may not really even matter, because there's a saying about no one cares how much you know until they know how much you care, or something like that. I'm probably not saying that correctly. No one cares how much you know until they know how much you care. So connecting with people and building those relationships on a personal level can be super helpful, and building that trust. And you may be the right person to do that, and sometimes you may need to rely on your partners to do that if you're not a part of that community that you're trying to connect with. So, we want to make sure that we are going in there with the right person and the right information. Okay, so number 4, best practice number 4, now that we've got partnerships, partners to help us, and we're thinking about trusted messengers, we need to explain the risk, right? And there's a caveat here, of course, so that it's meaningful to your audience for sure, right? We don't want to just dump a bunch of science on people, because how much do they really need to know in order to take the action that you want them to take? I'm willing to bet it's not as much science information as you think. Um, One way to do this, and I love that you already mentioned talk story. I think stories are so powerful, right? That different parts of our brain fire when we are listening to stories, and we're especially connecting on an emotional level. And they're a great way to relay facts and information, But if you're connecting and different parts of your brain are all firing, you're more likely to remember that information, you're more likely to act on it. And also you're more open to creative problem solving, which can be so important in this space. So definitely think about, and if you're not the storyteller or you don't have the personal stories, then bringing in folks who can do that, um, and or even conveying their stories. But of course, first person is the best way to do that. But there's lots of resources out there for telling better stories. Um, Photos, of course, are also great. I would push back and say that if you're going to use charts and graphs to convey a bunch of information, hit pause for a second and see if you can convey the same information using words and photos instead. That may not be popular, but seeing these photos and kind of people connect and seeing the smiling, happy families doing the action, taking the actions you want folks to take can be very empowering. If we're showing the doom and gloom photos, that can be disempowering and we can feel overwhelmed very quickly. So use photos that are going to help empower your audience. Um, and even ask them to bring their own photos. This could be a way to incorporate the storytelling as well. If they bring photos of maybe how they were impacted from a previous storm or from the fires, for example, then that'll be a great way to have them share their story, and then even have them bring photos of places in their community that they care about and they might want to protect in a future hazard. Of course, mapping tools are very popular. This is from our coastal flood exposure mapper. This is the Charleston area. That's where I'm sitting at the moment. But keep in mind that not everyone is a map person, but these can be a great way for folks to engage and gather around and share. I think I saw participatory mapping listed in. Yep, there it is. Nancy, thank you. It's that can be a great way to get people, even quieter people, to open up and share and engage. Can be a great tool to use. So you've already kind of shared some ideas here. I want you to share some more approaches that you have used to explain risk. So I'm going to so go back to the chat box and share some ideas for what you have used to explain risk. Oh, Liz, thank you for sharing that resource. Stanford article. Power of analogy stories. Great. Monica explaining probability. Yes. Yep. As chance 1 out of 10. Well, story mapping. Yep. Yes, I also appreciate infographics too. I think they're a great way I wish I had the skills to create infographics. So just kind of universal graphics and images to convey a lot of information that also can help get over language barriers if that's something that you have to think about for your communities. Lessons from past events, definitely. Yep. Compare risk to everyday activities. Risk of hitting by car. Yep. Yes. Poor air quality. Oh, I like that. Thank you, Adam. That's a good point. Something that people can relate to, right? Renderings before and after photos, photoshopped images. Yes. Yes, I like that, Nancy, the color categories on maps, the darker and the versus the lighter, that's also really more a great example of being more accessible, right? For folks that can't distinguish different colors. Right. All right. So keep those ideas coming. You all are full of great ideas. So the next best practice, number 5, is to explore options for reducing risk. And this is really, we can't be all doom and gloom. We can't be all about the science and the risk and the hazard and right. We need to give people an opportunity to create and discuss solutions. If they are a part of that process and actively exploring solutions and strategies, they're going to be more likely to be bought in and follow through. And that's where really you come up with some of those creative ideas that you hear and can really help move the community forward. Who better to discuss and share ways to protect the community from harm than the community members themselves, right? So creating that space and facilitating those conversations can, be super important to identify those strategies. Um, I'm wondering if you all have some examples here to share as well of how you have explored options to reduce risk with your audience. I know there are some games that are out there as well. So go ahead and share in the chat box too if you have some ideas for how to explore options and what that could look like with your audience. And I think some of the ideas you've already shared with using maps and things could also be helpful here. I think there's some games. The game of floods is one that I hear quite a bit. And there's also a watershed game. So kind of putting people in the role of local government to make decisions and recognizing the challenges there. All right, having a communications plan, definitely be helpful. Educating people on the subject before trying to explain it. Explain the risk, yep. Campaigns and tabletop exercises, definitely. All right, I think I'm getting a little behind here, so I'm going to keep going. I want to make sure there's time for questions, and I think Amy has an announcement to make at the end as well. But all right, so another way to explore options is to take folks out to see those options, kind of having a field trip. I think that I always think of the city of Milwaukee and their Metropolitan Sewerage District building, where they've implemented a number of strategies to deal with the stormwater and the heavy rain and the flooding that it causes. And they have implemented rain gardens and pervious pavers and new like drainage processes, and they have field trips where they take folks to see that and to ask questions, and they even have signage to explain those processes. So it's really taking people out to see the examples, and this is actually an example of a dune restoration project. So giving people some ideas to start with when you're thinking about options, um, to lower risk, and then taking them out to kind of see what those options might look like can be super helpful for planting the seeds and giving them ideas, but then also kind of showing what other folks have done that has been helpful to reduce risk. So now that we are exploring options to reduce risk, I want to talk a little bit about messaging. And this one I think is challenging because we want the magic words. We want the slogan that's going to get our audience to take the action we want them to take. And there are no magic messages or slogans that are going to work, right? The communication you have with your audience and getting to know them and what's going to work with them is the most important element here. But there are some things we can do. And one of those things is to think about framing. And framing is how the information is packaged. It's what you say and how you say it. And it packages it in a way that sort of connects and is understandable and kind of familiar to your audience. So an example here would be we often talk about preparedness, and that's kind of a good universal frame for a variety of individuals and a variety of people, whether they are community focused and helping their community, then they see preparedness as a way to motivate them to and their community to be prepared for future hazards. If they're individual focused, they see it as a call to action for themselves to be prepared. So preparedness can be a good frame to use, but I've heard that another frame that actually can also be universal, which is very helpful for a variety of audiences, is to think about this idea of a legacy frame. So we quite often we have this present bias. We think about the current. It's hard for us to think about the future. We can think about the past and past storms and events, which makes sense, but it's hard for us to think about the future. But if you kind of have folks think about a legacy, what legacy do they want to leave for future generations? It might be for their kids or their grandchildren, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. For folks who don't have children, they can still, the legacy frame has still been found to resonate with them because we want to leave a better place for the future generations. So that can be a kind of a way to frame your interactions with folks and kind of get them to think about the future and preparing and for future hazards. Um, I'm curious if you all have other frames that you have used or ways that you've kind of seen folks frame their communications that might resonate. So go ahead and type in the chat again. One of them that I hear a lot also is kind of the economic message. Oh, tsunami stones in Japan. Oh, I want to hear more about that. Showing where it's safe to build above. Oh, neat. So is it like a line of stones? Interesting. Okay. A land management framework. Nice. Yeah. So kind of a process that's already in existence that they use, I'm guessing. Okay. Makes sense. Okay. Oh, engraved with poetry. Oh, interesting. Risk and safety. Oh, nice. Thank you for sharing. Talking story with survivors of previous disasters. Yep. Culturally based framing of risk. Yep. Definitely. Thank you. All right. I'm gonna keep moving here. Continue to share other ways to frame. Um, so the next, this one, I'm could get on my soapbox on this, but I won't. But when you are connecting with different communities, be sure to use plain language. I think that this is super important. It's not about dumbing it down, but when we start talking about technical things and it's making sure that it's communication that your audience or your readers understand the first time they hear or read something. We don't want to make it more difficult for folks than we have to. Using shorter words and shorter sentences and not using our jargon for sure, right? So thinking about how we can make it more understandable for our audiences. And you might, even if you do have a technical audience, if you practice together with your other technical audience people, your other technical people, to use plain language, then when they are connecting with folks that are not as technical, you'll all be better off and have practiced using your plain language and gets us out of our habit of using our jargon. So I'd highly encourage you to use plain language. When it comes to tailoring your messaging, sometimes we need to get to the point where, and this is where kind of risk communication in planning situations and crisis communication overlap more so than in other situations. Sometimes we need to tell people what to do, right? And turn around, don't drown, right? We want to, we want to make sure that we're clear and concise, and we can identify actions that people can take and the benefits for sure, right? Or in this case, losses avoided. That is sometimes more motivating because we don't want to lose something that we already have. So it can be more motivating to avoid a loss than it is to have a benefit, even if it's an equal opportunity. Like even when it comes to money, a money situation, we want to avoid the loss, and it's a more appealing solution. So identifying actions and those benefits for sure can in our messaging. And finally, when it comes to messaging, it's important to test your message or your product with members of your actual audience, not with your coworkers, because they speak the same language you do. And it's probably not plain language. You have your own jargon and your own shorthand. So test with your actual audience members. You can use focus groups or surveys or conversations. I know when we were to do this testing, I know when we were building a new website, we actually got people on a virtual call and had them open it up and just give us reactions. What do you think of when you see this? What do you expect to see here? Asking those open-ended questions and then incorporating their feedback for sure. So when you're thinking about your messaging and testing your messaging. Okay, so our final best practice, now that we have our messaging, how are we going to get that information out? Of course, aside from one-on-one conversations, right? Which of course is the best way. I mean, I'm realistic here. We do need to find other ways to get information out. And since we need to hear the same message over and over multiple times from multiple trusted sources before it connects, we certainly want to use these other mechanisms. Of course, starting with a method that will reach your audience. How are they going to find this information? How do they want to receive it? Starting there. Of course, social media is inexpensive and quick and easy, so we turn to that quite often. But is your audience using social media to connect with their friends and family across the country, or are they using it for hazards information? That's something you really want to know about your audience. And as you're getting to know them, figuring out what methods are going to reach them the best is an important thing to identify for sure. And we also want to think about accessibility, accessible information, and making sure we're 508 compliant, making sure that we have the right colors and graphics and images are accessible. And there's lots of accessibility checkers out there that can help you like review your slides and things virtually. So thinking about that sort of information is super helpful. And also when we're having opportunities in person, making sure we have accessibility as a consideration there as well. Thinking not just about like physical accessibility, but even the time of day, the day of week, the location, the host, the language, all of these things are important to consider when we are designing an event or an interaction with our audience. And finally, my kind of final thought here on this particular best practice is that risk communication is a marathon. It's not a sprint. Um, Using the different types of communication approaches so that people are exposed to this information multiple times repeatedly over time, and we're continuing that dialogue and sharing information and building those trusts in that relationship is the best way to kind of have that most effective risk communication that we can. So that's the list of best practices. I'm always curious which one kind of stuck with you or resonated the most. If you want to share and type in the chat one more time, just to see what you were thinking about trying on your own. And then I would encourage you to certainly use the risk communication strategy. And the follow on to that is this next, like a template type of thing, connecting with your audience and planning your next interaction. This is another resource that we have available to help, whether it's a conversation with a member of your priority audience or whether it's kind of you're planning an event. It can help you think through some of the logistics and the materials and the supplies and who you're going to have and what type of content and all of those things. And there's even some examples in there of how other folks have done this type of work. And then we also have a virtual um, online module that, as we call it, a self-guided module preparing for effective risk communication. And this is also includes some tips for conversations, and it can also help you step through the steps of developing a strategy. And then finally, just some contact information. I work with a team here at OCM. So you can connect with our team, the ocm.riskcom, COM, just one M, team at NOAA.gov. And then we have what we call our Digital Coast Risk Communication page. That's a page on our website, and I'll provide these links to Amy to share afterwards. But that is kind of our curated list of risk communication resources. And then we have a full list. If you scroll down on that page, you get to the full list of resources. And reach out to us. We love doing this work. We love helping, and we can actually talk through and give you some ideas and some things to think about for your specific needs and your specific risk communication efforts. So thank you so much, and thank you for participating and sharing. I really appreciate it. You all are clearly doing some awesome work, and I love to see the examples in the chat. I mean, it makes for such a much richer opportunity for all of us when you all share like that. So thank you. And there's I want to make sure I get these links before we close out the session, but I'm going to turn it back to you, Amy. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you so much, Stephanie. That was really good. So much knowledge and actionable too. I think we can implement some of these messages immediately. One of the things that really stood out to me was the stories are powerful. I think that's one of the biggest nuggets that I'm going to take away from today's session. So thank you, Stephanie. Really well done. With that, we can open it up for questions. You can feel free to put your message in the chat and I can read it, or you can unmute. And don't worry about writing everything down. There's so much good knowledge. I will be sharing the chat and be sharing all of the links provided after the meeting. So with that, open it up for questions. So one of the good things about facilitating is I get to ask all my questions first. So one of the things that I wanted to kind of touch back on, one of the first strategies were to reach everyone. And I was just wondering if you had an example of when it was really hard to reach a community, maybe a rural community, and how you overcame that. Because I find sometimes that can be a little bit harder to implement.
Yeah, definitely it can be. And I think that, recognizing that in person, of course, is best. And starting with those partners, asking around and seeing who is already connecting with that community and finding those trusted messengers for sure of like, where is like the community center? And it doesn't geographic center, but, the community leaders, the community center where the members go to interact and certainly starting there with people who are already connecting with that community. I was thinking about some work that some colleagues did in Maine, in rural Maine, and they ended up kind of doing the road trip and going to connect with smaller, more rural communities and having the conversations. But they brought someone who was already starting to do that work and starting to connect and had those relationships. I think that's just super important to kind of start there instead of being the outsider coming in, right? So
Definitely.
yeah.
Oh, thank you. We did have a question from Monica. What is the most common request you receive for helping with risk communication, and a follow-up, and or the greatest need?
I think it's very similar to what you were asking, Amy. Just kind of some of those kind of breaking in and getting started, I think is the challenge for sure. I think that, if particularly when someone has funding or has money to go into and work with a community and they're sort of just getting started and kind of like, okay, what does this look like? How does that work? I mean, hopefully, ideally, they have already made those connections before they sort of went after the funding itself. But I think just starting with the partners and people who've already have those connections, but then putting in the time and going in and listening and don't have an agenda, don't have a plan, and don't think like, oh, I'm going to go in and talk to them and share this and this and this and all these things I'm doing for my project, right? But going in and being a community member almost and listening and going to their cleanup day, the beach cleanup, or an event, or the farmer's market, or, and connecting with people that way and building that relationship and building that trust. I think that's one of the hardest things. And, we've heard stories of folks who have, ended up going back and they've built that trust and then they would take books to give to the lady who they interacted with and her child. It's like, I love that, like you get to that point where you've got that relationship. And I know it takes time and it's hard to do, but showing that you care and that you're there and you're committed and for the long haul. I think that's where people struggle, and it's hard and it takes time, but it's so worth it because then you're trusted and you're a part of that community. So that's where I think we get a lot of questions and people are challenged for sure.
Mary has her hand raised. Go ahead, Mary.
Yeah, she sort of just touched on what I was going to ask about, and that is when you have a community that really is not trusting, and they're actually hostile
Mm.
and they have kind of like their own belief in different theories, conspiracy theories, and whatnot. And they can actually even be threatening. But
Oh, goodness.
what kind of, have you had any examples, or anybody have any examples of how you broke through that?
Yeah, I'm curious if others have examples. I have definitely not interacted with a community that was threatening. I have had people tell me that where they have had folks who have they thought they were connecting with community leaders and they thought their project was going to move forward, and then someone came in and just was like, nope. It turned out they were also a trusted messenger and they kind of shut down their whole project, and they're like, all this time was wasted. And it's just so disheartening. I'm curious if other folks have ways to get past that, but it still just has to. It, it takes a long time to overcome that distrust for sure. Once you've lost the trust, and I can share a resource. There's some a resource about like overcoming that distrust. That might be helpful, has some tips and things there, but it's going back to sort of putting in that time and listening, and not having your agenda when you go in, just yeah, hoping to rebuild it. And maybe there are some other folks who you can connect with that are in that community and kind of slowly get to the people who are causing the problems and who are the hostile ones, like kind of chipping away at the edges to build that back. But yeah, I'm sorry, that's really hard.
Yeah, it is. Thank you.
Yeah.
Another question in the chat, does AI offer any potential improvements for risk communication?
That is definitely not my area of expertise. I would be curious to see what other folks think. I think so much of it is about the people and the connections that I'm sort of hesitant, but I'm sure there's something that can help, and maybe it's looking through the literature to see what worked and doing kind of using AI in that way to kind of research the approaches and that sort of thing. But I'm curious what other things. That's a really good question. What other people think about that? Yeah.
Yes, I can see AI being both a positive and a negative. We'll just see how it progresses. We do have one
Yes.
more question. NOAA is changing. What services will continue and how will city and state interact with NOAA?
That is a great question, and I really wish I knew. We have heard that our organization will look different, but we don't know what it will look like. So we're in Office for Coastal Management underneath National Ocean Service, part of NOAA, and I really don't know. I know we do have a lot of passionate folks that want to help and want to continue this work. So, knock on wood, hopefully we will still be able to do that. Um, I do think that if there are some resources that you find on this page of resources that you're interested in, or you think you might be interested in the future, one of my colleagues said, well, you might want to tell them to download it in case something goes awry with our website. So I know that's not encouraging, but yeah, I really don't know. If you find out, let me know.
Definitely, we'll all share it with each other. We are a community
Yeah.
here, so
Yes, for
I
sure. And I
um,
feel like you all especially in the Pacific and the islands, you have such a great community, and I know you'll continue to do excellent work, obviously with or without NOAA. So, but yes, we want to be here to support you. I see one more comment. I see the lesson about the six pack and the chips. That sounds fabulous. So, thank you, Liz. That's a great way to end.
It's a lesson from federal practice years ago on the Ohio River. So if it works
Oh.
in Ohio on the riverbanks, it can work anywhere.
Yeah, there could be different ramifications, different kind of iterations of that. It might look different in different geographies, but that would be a great study to see how that translates and what the different cultures kind of their version of that is, right? Yep.
perfect. Does anybody have one last burning question? Hearing none, I do have a quick shout out for everyone interested in emergency management, which I hope is everybody on this call. There's an exciting event coming up right here on Oahu. The IAEM Region 9 Symposium will be held on August 12th through 13th at the Japanese Cultural Center in partnership with the University of Hawaii. This is a great opportunity to network, learn from professionals in the field, and get involved with the broader emergency management community. If you're a student or even early career to mid-level career, please check out EMP Hawaii. It's a local initiative offering training, mentoring, and professional development for those of you especially new to the field. They're also exploring the idea of opening up a student chapter at UH. So anybody here from UH, please get in touch with them. Lastly, the call for speakers has closed, but there may still be room for additional submissions. So don't hesitate to reach out if you know a speaker or would like to speak. I put the details into the chat, and be sure to tune in next month. We are going to have EMP Hawaii be our featured speaker at next Thursday's event. So with that, thank you so much. I will provide all of the links and the resources provided in the chat and from Stephanie. Stephanie, thank you so much. This was very, very informative.
Oh, thank you, Amy, and thanks everyone. Take care.
Go smell the pluff mud, Stephanie.